Now and forever, we bring IT to life.
Welcome to our Connect with Remedy webinar recording. I will now turn it over to our presenter. Thank you.
Welcome to today's Connect with Remedy webinar. My name is Ross Mitcham. I am a lead product developer with the ITSM applications team. And today we're going to be talking about ITSM and Remedy archiving. So the agenda for today, we're going to do basically cover an overview, the goals of archiving, the process behind it that supports archiving, both from an AR standpoint and from an ITSM standpoint. We're going to talk about the options of how one archives today and the desired approach. And we'll follow that up with the ITSM approach to consuming and using archiving within the applications. And then finally, we'll have a live demo, and after that, we'll provide some reference content and some Q&A time. So we begin with the overview, the archive goals. What we were trying to accomplish here is currently customers want to optimize performance of their system after years of high volume ticket creation. There's so much data in the production system, it will eventually slow down any user systems. So the goal is to improve that performance. The other goals that we have is to enforce retention policies. How long do you keep data in the system, and then how long do you keep data in general overall? So a lot of times, as an example, Remedy On Demand has a policy of 2 years in production, 5 years in archive for a total span of 7. So the goal is to provide that kind of control for customers. The other thing is the ability to offload archive data. So there's one thing to improve performance by removing data from production tables. That doesn't reduce the overall footprint of the database. So the other thing that is provided in this overall function is the ability to offload that data to file systems. And that will give users the ability to keep their database footprint size consistent. Lastly, and most importantly, customers expect archive functionality to be an out-of-the-box feature. Currently today, everybody has gone about their own process with their own custom code to meet the needs of archiving. Out of the box, ITSM should provide all the relationships, the ability to offload child or to archive child data, and complex data models should be handled without having to create your own workflow. Okay, so the overview process, basically the first step in the process is defining the policy and associations which are set up. So today the policy is ostensibly you define a qualification of parent tickets to be archived, you define a default age, you define the date, and you define the status of that policy. So we want to archive help desk, let's say greater than a year and a half greater than a year and a half based on submit date. So that's the policy that gets created. The other thing that applications provides is what's called associations. Very confusing because there's the term association exists in many areas. This is an AR object which allows you to relate child form entries to parent form entries by a primary foreign key. So we've shipped out of the box for applications these associations that say work log is related to help desk, HPD associations is related to help desk, and it defines all those keys. These objects that we define, these associations which are provided by AR, they're a new object just like an active link or a filter. These associations also provide the ability to define cardinality between parent and child and dependencies. Okay, so once that has been defined, and this is shipped with applications, once that's defined, the archive process kicks in today. So it will look through anything that has a policy, and it will archive it and its children based on the association's model defined. Now, what will happen is there's really just a mirror image of any form that's going to be archived, parent or child, and that data will be moved to the copy of those forms. Okay. This today will run on a continuous basis. So archive, as one would think of it in the past, used to run on a scheduled, there was a calendar, you could say a date and a time. Now we have implemented what is continuous archiving. You can set that up on an hourly basis, a daily, weekly, whatever is required, and it can be a more consistent, more even process without the spikes, the peaks and the valleys of scheduled archiving that we typically think of in the past. So this continuous archive will look through whatever policies are defined, and it will export its parent and child data to these tables, which are a copy of the production tables. Okay? That step 2 is what actually keeps your tables performing as efficiently as possible by taking data out of those production tables and moving them to these archives. The third step in all this is exporting the data altogether from the system, which will maintain the footprint size of your database. Okay? This can be based on a time frame, how old the archives are before you export them, and they will be exported to a CSV. This is currently done on a manual basis. Okay? So that's really the approach to archiving today that's shipping in 9.0. Now, let's talk about the options for archiving. Some of it I've alluded to already. The first option that you have is to archive now. So for whatever business reason, you may choose to go in and select a policy, and let's take, for example, change management, and you want to execute the archive exactly at this point. For whatever business reason, if you've had a sudden inflow of changes over a period of time and you cannot wait for the regular weekly continuous archive to run, you can execute on demand whatever policy you choose to. The other option is the continuous archival. Now, the traditional approach, as I mentioned, is scheduled based on a calendar and a time, and it's per form. The new approach is continually being run on a periodic basis, whatever a customer so chooses, and it will archive the parent and the child based on the policy. Okay? The advantages really in doing this is no dips, peaks, and valleys in performance of archive, no schedules need managing, and it really is optimized for a 24/7 organization because traditionally a lot of people schedule these archives, once a month, every 2 months. It might happen at midnight, 1 in the morning, something like that. But in a 24/7 organization, you can't have that kind of peak and valley. So the idea is to spread that out in this continuous approach, and then you do not have that type of impact on the system. So next we're going to talk about some of the concepts within the ITSM archive approach. So AIR's provided the functions of policies and associations and continuous archive. So here we're going to discuss basically the concepts within ITSM. So just a couple points to talk about. We are only archiving transactional data. Templates, config, and otherwise are not handled at this point in time. Tickets are considered peers. So as an example, we do not prevent the archive of an incident just because it's related to a change, for example. If the incident meets its individual criteria for the archive policy, it will be archived. Okay, so everything is considered a peer, and they will archive on their own policy definitions. Of course, there are some exceptions, mainly task. So, for example, task is a child to the incident and will be archived even if it's open. Now, a caveat to that, one can set up rules that says an incident or a parent cannot be closed until all the tasks are closed. So if that rule is in effect, then this has no impact. But it is a caveat if you do not have that rule in place. Okay? I think as everyone knows, archives are really defined in a data model where there are two halves to an association. Incident related to change, for example, has two halves to that association record. When the incident is archived, it's one half of the association will be archived as well. What that does, and the benefit of that, is that allows the change user to at least see and view that relationship that it was tied to that incident. However, the incident's no longer available because it's been archived. But it lets you see the history and the life cycle of that ticket until, of course, the change itself gets archived. Okay, core areas within the apps are responsible for removing their own children. So approval has its own set of definitions, archive definitions, with its children. And generally what happens is there's one key record, and we'll use, in this example, AP detail. When I have change and I've related it to an approval, I just link the change to the AP detail record, and the AP detail approval engine itself has all its relationships to its children. So, and where that's a benefit to people is if you have a custom application, for example, you may utilize the approval engine yourself, in which case you don't need to know all the complex structure of approval engine and all the child data that's stored within it. One would just need to know my custom app is related to its detail record by this key, and then once you archive that record, it will archive the AP detail, and then AP detail has all its own archive defined already that one does not have to know about. So it's easy for consuming archive for other engine type areas, like approval, like task. Okay? Archive forms are repository only right now. There is no working UI on these forms and is not really intended to be used in that manner. What I really want to highlight here is you may go to the interface, but it may look somewhat broken. So let's take infrastructure change. If you open up the infrastructure change archive form, you're going to notice some data is not populated, web toolbars may or may not be visible, things may not function the way you'd expect them to, and that is simply because these are just copies of the form with no workflow. There is a lot of workflow on the parent forms today which help manipulate the UI and make it function properly. Doesn't exist on the archive forms today. There are future plans in this area, but for the most part, people can utilize the new reporting functions to report off these forms or whatever they choose to. And in some cases, you can open up the UI direct URL, but you're not going to have a lot of the function and feature that you might want. One other thing to consider, policies are not tenant aware. So if you, and we'll look at this in the demo, when you walk through the definition of a policy on infrastructure change, it's defined anything that's closed, greater than so many days old, etc. It's not company specific. You can define one archive policy per form and not per form per tenant. Okay, so, and generally I think for the most part this works for people. I've had a few requests to archive at the tenant level. Okay, so the archiving process, and again, to fully recognize all the gains that we are trying to provide. So for example, that are performing forms with less data in it, and we are trying to keep the footprints the same. Generally speaking, database dependent, customers will have to execute some sort of database maintenance functions. Okay. And again, it doesn't have to be every time you archive data. So the principle might be something like this. We archive on a daily basis, and we do and we export on this basis, and we do database maintenance routines every 6 months. Right? That will help you fully realize the gains with what archiving is providing. Okay? Archiving by default is set to disabled for every policy after install or upgrade. And the reason being, you may have actually had archive on already in a previous version where you've defined your own workflow, you've set your own policies and qualifications. And what's happening is we want to make sure that when we upgrade, even though you had it on before, the policies will be off for the explicit purpose of making sure that everyone understands that all that custom code's really no longer needed, and may in fact potentially cause a conflict with the native archiving function we are now providing. So it's disabled so that customers understand they may need to go look at things, they may need to change the policy, they may want to evaluate the policy, and they may want to tweak it somewhat. Okay, so that's why they are set disabled to start. Just people have a good understanding. And it may be, here's the other fact, you may not want to turn on continuous archiving. If you have a system that's been feeding data for 6 years, accumulating a ton of data, you may not want to turn on all the policies all at once. So this lets you implement it in a more controlled fashion to ensure, the archive process doesn't take a very long time by trying to archive all your data at once. Okay? The other approach, and the one thing to think about, is all data is archived. This includes any of the sample data that we have today. So sample incident, change tickets, problem, etc. Those will get archived, and there is a way to prevent archive. We have actually allowed users to set a flag. So if one really needed to, you could set all those flags on the sample data if one wanted to keep it. Okay? This is a quick slide on the out-of-the-box archive definitions. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but understanding from an app's standpoint, you'll see here the list of the systems and applications we are providing archive for here, where you see the policy provided. The policy means we are going to go through each one of these applications based on the criteria, and we are going to execute archive. Okay, policy provided, yes, 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 yes. So these are the things we provide the policies for. Okay, and down here you'll see what's not currently available in the 9.0 release. Down here. And you'll also see things here when you see policy definition, archive definition provided. So this is what I was talking about. So we provide the task and all its children and its relationships. So the definitions are provided. There is no policy because task does not archive independently on its own policy. It is archived based on its parent. Okay, so that list can be referred to later to understand what was. And here is really just a general list of the out-of-the-box qualifications that is being used. You'll notice the qualification. There's an aging date of, for example, 548 days, which we don't have on this slide, and it's based on submit date in most cases. There are exceptions where we use different dates, like the knowledge article last modified date. There are some subtle differences, and you look in SRM and work order, very similar as well. They do also rely on these flags. Now, these are the out-of-the-box best practice type qualifications. So you can refer to those. And we will go through them in the demo as to where to see that and what to do. So at this point, we're going to start a live demo, and the way we're going to walk through this is really from a end user standpoint. How do I use archiving? How do I turn it off, change it, run it, look at things? And after that, we will get into the other things you might be interested in, which as an administrator, how do I archive my custom apps? How do I add something if I have my own child form of help desk or change management? So that's the way we're going to work the demo. So let's flip over to today. Users may come in here, and one of the nice things about 9.0 is the archiving feature. Along with many other things, we are trying to remove the constant need to be an administrator to do certain things. So there is actually a permission granted to allow you to do archiving. It's called Archive Admin. It can be granted to somebody, which will give them access to the AR System Archive Manager console. So what I talked about is there's an administrator permission that will allow you to see this. So you no longer have to grant somebody an administrator permission. I can go to this console, and it is really divided into 3 distinct sections. The overall system setting for the archive, the continuous archive, is it on or off, and what is my interval? There is the independent archive policies that we provide out of the box, and then there is the export capability down here at the bottom. Okay? So this is the default settings right now. Very quickly, you can change the interval to whatever one requires. 24 hours might be a standard. You can enable, disable. Even though this is enabled, and again, like I talked about, even though this is enabled out of the box, all your policies are currently set to a -1 custom age in days, which really means, if you look at the note here, clearly means it's disabled. So we'll take a look at enabling, let's say, for example, incident management archive policy. It's as simple as that. And when you're looking at it, the default of 548 days is used a year and a half from submit date. You can actually run the policy if one wanted. Okay. And one can monitor by going into standard AR system logging to look at the archive that's occurring. So for that, the login is the administrative user. For one to look at logging, you still need to have that type of permission. Sorry, selected the wrong entry. As usual, where we do all our other logging, you can actually go into this tab. And we have the archive log. Okay. Important thing to note about the archive log, and a lot of people have mentioned concerns about this. So if you go into archive now, you can go to your incident management policy and you can run it. I'm going to flip back to the logging screen. I hope everyone can see my screen. So in the logging, what I'm going to do is just highlight kind of what is typically seen within the logs. Again, very hard to read in there. So you'll notice there's a very specific user, and I think that's still always the way it used to run as AR Archiver. And you will notice, starting archiving, it goes through all the relationships that it needs to go through to find that 0 entries have been archived. Okay? There's really nothing there at this point. Now, we have this done, and let's say this is running for a particular amount of time. This is continuous. this one policy, you can also alter. If you don't like 548 days, you may say 700 days. Now, the key here is this 548 days is taken from the out-of-the-box shipped ITSM definitions. This data that you've entered here of 700 custom days will not impact upgrade in the future. If the policies in the future will still be 548, this data will still be there during upgrade, and it takes precedence if you've entered this custom date. So from that aspect of future upgrades, fully supportable if you want to change your particular aging for archive. Okay? And last but not least, we actually do have, and again, that's getting data out of the production system. The last part of the export or the archive cycle is exporting and deleting data. You have an option for both, just to delete if you wanted to, but if you want to keep a CSV file, you can actually run this, select your age and days. Now, very important here. This is really how old is the archive itself. So I may have an incident ticket here that waits 700 days before it gets moved to the archive. Then if I were to say 200, it's not 200 days, the age of the incident, it's 200 days from when this got archived, which was 700 days plus another 200 days. Then when you export, it will actually produce that file. So a very important concept there, okay? And the exports will go into a file. I'm just going to flip to a screen quickly to show you kind of what that looks like. Okay. In the AR system DB directory, you are going to find a GUID-specific ID, which will have a directory with the different forms that can be archived. And once you open up any of these forms, you will see it has been exported into a CSV format of the tickets that got exported. Okay? So that's what the export will do for you. Now your database footprint is being maintained at a steady state and a steady size. So that is the archive console in general. So now we're going to talk about, let's go back and reset this to the system value of 548 days. Okay, this is the default I want to use, that's fine. So you noticed in the one example, we did not see any tickets being archived, and one might ask why that is. So let's say we have a new ticket here, and what we're going to do, we're going to go look at the policies for incident. So now we're getting into kind of more the administrative part of this, but what one can do is look at the main form that the policy is defined for. So let's take a look at how this has occurred, okay? We have defined a copy and delete. We have defined a form that this will archive to, and everything that gets archived, parent and child, must have this turned on so that it's got a form to move the data to. Out of the box, we have defined it's part of the archive policy. Checking this flag on means that it doesn't really have any parent. We've got to look through this form and find what we want to archive, okay? And you'll see the criteria: status is greater than or equal to closed, and this do not archive flag is null. And we specify which date we are using for the aging date. The submit date's used at 548 days. So this is typically what gets overridden in the form that we looked at earlier. If you wanted to change it, you don't have to change in here. You do not have to overlay. This is why we had this particular field, custom age and days. If you wanted to override it, you do it with data, and you do not have to change application code or forms for that matter. Okay? So in looking at this, so that's really describing how we turn on archive. And you'll notice for all the other forms, like it's children, Workplug has a very similar definition. Look at the archive. And the key thing you'll know here, this is a child, so it doesn't have any archive policy. There is no criteria that the archive engine needs to look through. This data is archived specifically by some form of association. Those are those new AR objects we talk about which relate worklog to its parent. And we'll go take a look at that. So here's the new object we have discussed. Associations. Excuse me. And we will search for, here's all the associations for help desk. So let's take a look at an example for the work log. Okay. So I'll give you a brief overview of what the overlay contains. It's estate, cardinality, the primary and secondary form, and then the fields that link these two forms together. This is how this is all enforced. So this association defines that relationship between parent and child. And you will see all the other parent and child relationships. These are provided by applications that define the model, the data model. Okay? So in doing that, we have this many associations. And they all do not bother with policy. They don't have it turned on. They don't need it because data is found to be archived in this form by this association so that when the help desk parent archives and it determines these work logs will also be archived, that is why you do not need a policy here. Only really the parent form needs to have that policy. Okay? And lastly, if you look at help desk, the other part of archiving definitions are here and this new object in the definitions. So the associations to archive are really just a list of saying, here's all the selected associations you need to follow when archiving my parent ticket. Okay, so stop here for a second, and I really want to talk about the importance of existing code, customizations, things of that nature. What's very good about this? So one thing to consider, we may have a parent form like help desk that has a relationship to AP detail, for example, for an approval, or more importantly in this case, task. Help desk can be related to a task. The task itself can also have children, and its children can have children. Now, typically, there really is only, the out-of-the-box definitions, there really is only two levels. So, you know, change to task, and then task will control its children, and change to approval. I do not think we have any three-level relationships, but the important thing to know is it will follow an association, and then it will follow its children, and it will follow its children. And if there are any errors in any way archiving any of these child data tickets and children of children, it will roll that all the way back up and will not commit the removal of that incident ticket, which is important because what you don't want is the incident or change or request being archived and some of its children encountered an error and didn't archive. That would create entries with no relationships to anything. So the engine is smart enough to look through this entire parent-child relationship structure and not commit any of the copy and delete actions until it's all been validated. So very important. And lastly, if one has written custom code on any of these child forms, if, for example, one may have written a filter that says, I never want anyone to delete this, deletes are not allowed, that would prevent the archiving of this ticket and all its children if it's encountering those errors. So one must evaluate code potentially if custom code's been written on any of these children that might throw an error during an archive process. Okay, so that's basically very quick summary of what the definitions look like, how to go things, the parent, the child, and then the relationship from the parent to child. All this is provided out of the box for that list of applications that we described on earlier slides. Okay? So we'll jump back now that we understand where things are defined and how they're defined is to how they work. So if today we look at something like this ticket, we notice that the policy right now is based on 548 days from submit date. So this ticket won't get archived for a while. That's why when we ran it, this ticket's here. And you'll notice this one has a very old submit date, but it did not get archived either. Right? And again, the reason is status must be, let's go back and look at what that was on the help desk form. Status must be greater than or equal to closed, and the do not archive flag is on. Now, so if I come in here, I see everything's fine, nothing's getting archived, and nothing should get archived. So if I were to go to this ticket, and I were to, let's say, for example, move this to the status of closed, now you notice, with archiving, there really is very little change to the UI. One of the things that was added, for example, commonly across these applications, is the ability to select this and prevent this ticket from being archived. And that would be in some sort of business use case where it might be a critical incident or change or request which you do not want to be archived. You want to maintain historical reference. Let's say it's for a large outage or a large change or whatever it may be, or a request, for implementing changes for thousands of users, and you want to have reference to this request for later use for relationships to other things. So again, one can do that, and we can actually, if we ran incident again, and we were to go back to this form, you still see this ticket here, right? That is because, again, it does not meet the criteria. Now, we go back to, let's say we were to change this and say, okay, you know what, I don't need to save this. And we go back to the archive console. And again, typically you're just going to let continuous run. We were in the policy again. The ticket's no longer there. It's been moved to the archive form. So the last part that I want to talk about as far as the general usage is, yes, there's still relationships. This is the half relationship I was referring to earlier. It still exists, but I can no longer perform functions with that relationship to that ticket. Quick actions and those types of things, it's been removed for historical purposes. This half of the association will get archived when this incident's ready to be archived. But until then, I can still see complete history. I know exactly what this ticket's been related to and more or less the life cycle of this particular incident. And importantly, this concept, the concepts that I've been showing you about, do not archive and those sorts of things, they all apply to the areas and the applications fairly commonly. Right? They may have a little bit different criteria for when they archive, 90 days, 548, submit date versus the knowledge date, but the principles in general remain the same. Everything I'm showing you generally remains the same. I'm not going to go to every ticket and describe and show in each case what's happening, but these principles are the same. It's easy to understand where to go look for the policy criteria, the number of days, how you change the days, and then really how the archive affects EUI, which is very minimal. Really the do not archive flag, and then some of the UI that's impacted is the stuff that's the relationships to other things that may or may not be there anymore, because quite often that hasn't existed. Tickets have been in the system really forever, unless somebody's written custom workflow to archive and then custom workflow to handle those tickets being gone. All right, so that's really the usage of archiving. Now I'm going to quickly talk about, again, we'll go back to the administrative function for how do I go about my own custom forms, creating my own archive. It is really quite simple. So let's take the example of a custom child form of help desk. Let's go look at it. So let's say I've created this form, custom help desk user error tracker, for example. I have something that I link to the incident, and I have whatever my other data fields are. I've created this custom form. So very simply, I want to be able to link the incident to this child form. In that case, I would create a new association. Let's say, for example, it's one-to-many. I'm going to pick my parent form. I'm going to pick my custom form, and my relationships are the incident ID, and the link on my form is this. And once I save this, now I have my association, I have my linkage. The only thing I would need to do at this point is open up that parent form, and we're going to go look at following associations. So this is something we kind of talked about briefly a little earlier. We have all our current selections of associations. We can say, you know what, let's pick an additive overlay, and we can select our custom error tracker. You'll see it's only additive. So for upgrades standpoint, this is perfectly fine. There will be no impact on upgrade. And really nothing else needs to be changed. We have the existing policy of help desk, which is 548 days old from submit date. The incident itself will get archived, and it will now follow all these associations, including your new child form, and it will archive that data. The only other thing that you would need to do is make sure, if you are archiving something, the other thing you would have to ensure is that your custom form, you need to have an archive form for this to go to. And again, as we talked about, because this is just a child form, everything that archives from here will be based on the parent. If it's always based on the parent, then we do not need to include it in the archive policy form. Archive is working now for that new child ticket. These same concepts apply to purely custom applications. Okay, you can create a new form, and let's do that as an example. We have a new regular form. You might call this. Okay, you can actually, very simply, you can copy and delete, just copy. Now this, because this is really a parent form, we can have a policy, we can create whatever we want, we can use whatever number of days. Let's do that, okay? Thought I changed that. Okay, right now, because you've included in this in the archive policy form, or included in archive policy, this is how we determine, based on this criteria, based on number of days. So it's that simple, where it's now part of, and you notice we didn't put a description there, so if we wanted to do that, this now is included in your archive policy. Your default is 700 days, and you haven't overridden it with anything. And pretty much because it's a custom form anyway. So now, as again, you can enable and disable as you see fit. You can set your days as you see fit, and it will just fall within the archive policy and the continuous archiving approach and schedule. So that is, long and short of it is creating additional custom forms. It's adding to the existing applications if you have your own child forms. So one last thing I wanted to actually address here as we walk through is talking about one thing that hits everybody as far as concerns go is the use case where, let's say, for example, when you first upgrade your box and everything's disabled and you turn on incident management policy. Somebody's have had concerns saying, well, I've got 5 million tickets that are now waiting to run. So if I run this hourly or every 5 hours or 6 hours as my continuous process, am I going to have a problem? Is one process certainly won't finish between that and the start of the next scheduled, every 3-hour archive. True, AR is smart enough to handle that. If it's currently executing, it will not clash with another process. It will continue until it's done. And as far as impact on server performance, this has been run against databases where upgrade has been done, archive has been turned on where there are, for example, 8 million tickets in the system, 6 million of which to archive. That continuous process will run probably for a few days, but it runs insulated on its own thread with very little to no impact on general users' usage. So this has been executed. This was one of the concerns. And the other nice part, if for some reason one thinks that there is impact, and again, it's been run, it's been done with no visible user performance impact, but if one perceives that there is an issue or there is, one could actually disable the policy real time, and archive will finish doing whatever it's doing at that moment. Even if it's in the middle of, another 2 million tickets to archive, it will finish what it's archiving at that point, and it will turn itself off real time when you disable the policy. It does not wait till that whole chunk of data has been processed. It waits till whatever it's doing is done, and then it will finish. So if one needs to shut it off real time, you have that option. Okay? That is, for the most part, function and feature of archive as implemented within service management. So both from what the platform is providing and then what ITSM is consuming and how it is defined and shipped to customers today. So we will go back quickly to the presentation. So in summary today, what we've seen in archiving, we've tried to explain the concepts, the architectural standpoint of how archiving works, and it's defined with AR's new objects, associations. We also got to take a look in the demo of your typical use case of once you've upgraded or done a fresh install, how to enable archive, how to alter it to the properties that, for example, number of days before archiving, if you want to change that, how to go about your day-to-day operations with enabling it. We've also discussed the concepts of and the differences really between archiving today and archiving in the past, as far as AR's concept of continuous archive. It's always running, and we don't have peaks and valleys and all those types of things. So this should give you enough information to be able to understand, enable, run, and use archive in your environment. So lastly, we're going to talk about references. You see here we have a series of links to that cover the ITSM archiving process, AR associations, what they do, as they do also provide other value other than archiving. So there are some other things may be of interest to you. And then there is a list of archive forms if you need to see them in knowledge articles. These are references, and you can choose to use these links and learn a little more as you see. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. That concludes our presentation today. You can contact BMC via the BMC communities. This will put you in touch with a global community of knowledgeable resources. There is also a wealth of information that is already posted and available via the communities. Facebook, Google+, and also you can follow us on Twitter. You can reach BMC technical support via the web, phone, email, and also via the external knowledge base. Thank you for attending this month's Connect with Remedy webinar series. Thank you.
Now and forever, we bring IT to life.